World News Tonight this Friday from the eulogy for John F. Kennedy Jr. and his wife, Carolyn. She was his shining star. He had a legacy, and he learned to treasure it. He was part of a legend, and he learned to live with it.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Good evening. What a week it has been. What a journey so many people have been on since last Friday evening, when John F. Kennedy Jr.'s plane disappeared into the Atlantic. What a public tragedy as well as a personal one. What an unspeakable week for the parents who lost two of their daughters and the sister who lost a brother. But it was more. As we learned in the course of this week, young John F. Kennedy was a link for two generations to the past. And today, here in New York City today, the Kennedy and the Bessette families celebrated John and Carolyn and Lauren's lives. Our first reporter is from ABC's Bill Blakemore.
It was a hot day on Manhattan's Upper East Side. The small church of St. Thomas More had room for only 350. It was strictly by invitation. The Clintons were there. So was Muhammad Ali. The Kennedy family, Jackie's sister, Lee Radziwill, lots of cousins, friends of the couple, a few old colleagues of John's father, the president. Among those behind the police lines, a children's ensemble which wanted to pay respects, and others who came in from around the city and country to get as close as they could. No cameras were allowed inside the service, where Senator Ted Kennedy, John's uncle, gave the eulogy for him. From the first day of his life, the senator said, John seemed to belong not only to our family, but to the American family. He had amazing grace, said the senator. He accepted who he was, but he cared more about what he could and should become. Senator Kennedy talked about family. John, he said, was also the son who was once protected by his mother. He went on to become her pride, and then her protector in her final days. He was the Kennedy who loved us all, said the senator, but who especially cherished his sister Caroline, celebrated her brilliance, and took strength and joy from their lifelong mutual admiration society. And the senator talked about Carolyn Bessette Kennedy. For 1,000 days, he said, he was a husband who adored the wife who became his perfect soulmate. John's father taught us all to reach for the moon and the stars. John did that in all he did, and he found his shining star when he married Carolyn Bessette. Senator Kennedy went on. He was still becoming the person he would be, and doing it by the beat of his own drummer. He had only just begun. We dared to think in that old Irish phrase, he said, that this John Kennedy would live to comb gray hair with his beloved Carolyn by his side. But like his father, he had every gift but length of years. A family friend gave the eulogy for Carolyn. There was a reading by her mother. John's sister Caroline read from Shakespeare.
The whole service was remarkably moving. It was extraordinarily personal. I think it was a salute to John. I think in a sense a lot of people were saluting him back for his contribution, and I think there was a sense of it's time to go on from there.
After the service, in the sunlight, the guests, young, old, walked to a nearby reception through the New York neighborhood where John grew up with the grace they celebrated today. Bill Blakemore, ABC News, New York.
The country's learned a great deal more about John F. Kennedy Jr. this weekend when you put aside, if that is possible, all the attendant glamour. He seems to come across as a real guy. More appealing, said one of his colleagues as we got to know more about him, unlike a lot of public figures. He may forever be an emblem of unfulfilled promises, but he will also be honored by many people whose lives were affected by his fundamental goodwill. Here's ABC's Deborah Amos.
In this sea of flowers, among the notes from many who never knew him, a wreath from someone who did. Norman Seabrook remembers John Kennedy for lending his name to a charity event for children.
He was special because he was a real human being, a person with authority, a person that could have done or been any place in America that he wanted to be, but he was there that night to share his love for the children.
He was there for children in New York's Harlem, too, instrumental in getting support for this experimental school and for kids here, quietly giving his money and his time to a program for the homeless and kids with AIDS.
Well, if he had wanted people to know, I think that he could easily have made it public. I think that was a private side of him, and something very real and straight from the soul.
Kennedy's public life was his glossy magazine, his frequent appearances at public events for one cause or another. But John Kennedy also used his name and his fame to create and support less obvious causes that reflected his life and his concerns.
Click on that switch.
Marjorie Basante works with the disabled. She received her training through a grant from Reaching Up, an organization John Kennedy founded to improve care for the mentally handicapped by supporting the caregivers.
I think that his spirit will always be with us because, he made such a big impact.
John's Aunt Rosemary was mentally disabled and spent years in an institution.
He brought a sense of dignity to a group of workers who wouldn't otherwise be recognized in this field.
Every year he personally picked the mental health workers who would receive grants. He knew them all by name.
It's not John's money, okay, that's important. It's John's actions.
The private actions of a very public man in the causes he chose and the lives he changed. Deborah Amos, ABC News, New York.
Given the level of fascination that people obviously have for the history of the Kennedy family, it is almost certain now that Caroline, his sister, will become much more an object of attention than she might like to be. ABC's Aaron Brown this evening on Sister, Daughter, Mother.
She buried her father at 6, her Uncle Bobby 5 years later. She buried her devoted mother and her kid brother all before she reached middle age. But like most everything else, she tells us little about how these losses shape her.
How have you managed to keep your life as private as you have?
Well, I haven't talked to people like you very much.
It is hard to blame her. She was a toddler when she became a public person.
I want you to meet my daughter, Caroline.
But at her mother's insistence and guidance, she grew from child to young woman to new bride, largely out of the public eye. Her mother's daughter, then and now.
Caroline looks almost the image of her father, the color of the hair, the eyes, the smile, the complexion, but her temperament is so much more like her mother.
But she is no recluse. She actively supports many of her mother's causes, especially the arts, and she has just as publicly supported her father's library. She has co-authored 2 books, one notably on the right to privacy, which she also actively promoted.
Justice Brandeis called it the right to be let alone, and I think that that's something that people take seriously here, and it's definitely under attack.
So what now for Caroline? While she is a Kennedy, she is not only a Kennedy. She didn't go to Hyannis to join the entire Klan after the accident. She stayed at home with her husband and 3 children, and that's her mother's influence too. And while the pressures may now increase to be more public, more political, we can only guess what she might do.
It will be interesting whether she chooses to have a more real public life or just set the public standard through her private acts that she's been doing.
As the family left the church today, Caroline was offering no clues which direction she is headed. Aaron Brown, ABC News, New York.
As we said earlier, it must have been an unspeakable week for the parents of the Bessette girls. There'll be a private memorial service tomorrow for the family in Greenwich, Connecticut. We'll be back with the other news of the day in just a moment.
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by Nicorette Gum.
The launch of the space shuttle Columbia was delayed twice this week, and when it finally did take off early this morning, there were several very tense moments. A nerve-wracking debut for the first woman to command an American space mission. Here's ABC's Ned Potter.
One can only imagine the pressure on Eileen Collins, much hyped for her gender, finally getting off the ground this morning.
We have booster ignition and liftoff of Columbia, reaching new heights for women in X-ray astronomy.
The launch was smooth, but only 9 seconds later, Collins reported trouble.
We've got a fuel cell pH number 1.
It turned out to be an electric short, knocking out some backup controls.
We're evaluating the fuel cell.
Still go, said Mission Control, but after that, the main mission of releasing the giant Chandra X-ray telescope
seemed easy.
There is nothing as beautiful as Chandra sailing off on its way to work.
The telescope will probe the universe in ways that cannot be done from Earth. And Columbia, its initial problems still a mystery, has a go to complete its flight. Ned Potter, ABC News, New York.
In other news today, the government has concluded that one of the only pieces of scientific research to ever link radiation from high-tension power lines with cancer was faked. The government found that the scientist who conducted the research actually falsified the data. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has canceled public tours of its Washington headquarters indefinitely. ABC News has learned that there have been several threats against FBI headquarters this year, including one in the past several days, and some of them are allegedly traced to followers of the alleged international terrorist Osama bin Laden. There was a frightening experience aboard a Japanese airliner today going from Tokyo to the northern city of Sapporo. A man with a knife forced his way into the cockpit of the 747 and stabbed the pilot to death. The hijacker then took the controls for a few moments. He said he liked flight simulation games and he wanted to fly under a bridge in Tokyo Bay. The co-pilot finally wrestled him to the ground. The plane landed and no one other than the pilot was in danger. The Middle East lost an influential leader today. Morocco's King Hassan has died of a heart attack. He was a quiet promoter of peace between Arabs and Israelis for many years. ABC's Bill Rediker tonight on the king, who was 70, and his legacy.
He was a king who did the unexpected, a king who took risks. Hassan was credited with the first secret meetings between Israel and Egypt that eventually led to the 1978 peace accord. More than a decade later, it was Hassan who repeatedly urged Yasser Arafat to meet with Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Although criticized for his authoritarian rule, by Middle Eastern standards, he was decidedly moderate, even pro-Western. He sent troops to support the United States in his campaign against Saddam Hussein. Tonight, 36-year-old Prince Sidi Mohammed announced his father's death. He will be the successor. Only 6 months ago, Jordan's King Hussein died, and power passed to his son. Two reminders that leadership in the Middle East is passing to a new generation. Bill Rediker, ABC News, London.
On the money tonight, Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was down more than 58 points to close at 10,910. On the NASDAQ, stocks were up just under 8 points. In a moment, on the subject of history, the century on Friday.
People ask me, who was the big act at Woodstock, and I always say the crowd was the big act.
A defining moment for a generation. There has been so much talk about history this week as millions of people make all the Kennedy connections. There's a celebration of the past this weekend. It is 30 years since Woodstock. In upstate New York this weekend, the promoters of Woodstock 99 are hoping to attract 200,000 people. The opening act today was James Brown. People who went to the original would hardly recognize this one. There were cash machines, an extreme sports park. They put up a cellular phone transmission tower. What would Wavy Gravy think? And how about having Woodstock on an Air Force base? It almost sounds like revenge. Tonight, Woodstock Nation.
By the time we got to Woodstock, we were happy snow.
But I remember just walking around with Jerry Garcia and just really admiring the whole thing. It was a living city. 550,000 people, that's a lot of people.
In the heat of the summer in 1969, a tiny farm in upstate New York was home to 3 days of music, magic, and mud. It is remembered simply as Woodstock.
Freedom, freedom.
Woodstock enabled a generation to express itself. It was a defining moment.
I sang Freedom last because I didn't know what else to sing. I didn't have anything else to sing. I thought I sang everything I knew.
Like so much else that weekend, Richie Haven's sixth encore wasn't planned.
Mr. Richie Haven.
And this music festival almost didn't happen. A few weeks before the event, the concert permits fell through. Producers had to scramble for a new location. They ended up on Max Yasgur's dairy farm.
I said, my neighbor, Max Yazga, my milkman, he has a farm with lots of acres, thousands of acres.
Concert promoters had booked a stunning array of performers. Crosby, Stills and Nash, Janis Joplin, The Who, Santana, and Jefferson Airplane.
Don't you want somebody to love?
But it was clear from the outset the audience would share the stage at Woodstock.
People ask me, who was the big act at Woodstock, and I always say the crowd was the big act.
Promoters had expected 50,000 people. When they got 10 times that number, Bethel, New York, as the writer William Manchester pointed out, briefly became the third largest city in the state. The United States had over 500,000 soldiers still fighting in Vietnam. There were tremendous racial divisions in the country. It had been a year of campus confrontation. There was a sense of generational division and conflict.
1, 2, 3, what we fighting for? The last guy broke the ground. Next stop is Vietnam.
For the younger generation, this festival became their statement to the world.
That you should question authority. That the government is not really equipped to deal with the necessities of most people, and that we have to change it.
And as they showed, you could live together in harmony, even under incredibly trying circumstances. Torrential rain, grossly inadequate facilities, and countless drug mishaps. Through it all, the citizens of Woodstock Nation were at peace with each other.
What we have in mind is breakfast in bed for 400,000. We must be in heaven, man!
People were conscious of the fact that they might have to move their tent over a little bit to make room for that tent next door so that nobody would be unhappy.
The musicians were inspired by the crowd. Even the old folks had to take notice. It was a stunning moment when Jimi Hendrix played his electric version of the Star-Spangled Banner. To outsiders, it was a sacrilege, as bad as a flag burning. But to most people there, it was a renewed declaration of American principles, adapted to the rhythms of the acid rock age. The Woodstock Nation, 1969. There's a way to experience some of it again, or to learn about it in the first instance, on the abcnews.com, thecentury.com, on our website. We'll be back in just a moment. Finally, this evening, as we said at the beginning, it's been a very difficult week. As Senator Kennedy said today of his nephew, the world knew his name before he did. As the senator said of Carolyn and Lauren Bessette, they were young women of limitless possibilities. There have been so many words spoken this week that we thought it best to end otherwise. as someone said outside the church today, time to move on. I'm Peter Jennings. Good night.